Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, January 7th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about some of the keys to the national title for these final four teams. I have about two per team, but frankly, there's a lot more than that. But I wanted to break down at least two for all the teams that, as I see it, so definitely we'll get into that to start. Then we got to get into the FCS Championship. Happened yesterday. NDSU tops Montana State, wins their 10th title in 14 years. We'll break it all down, including a ridiculous performance from Cam Miller and Bryce Lance. Then we'll get to some unsung heroes for possibly the final four teams, kind of get into players that could step up big. Not necessarily players that have been unsung heroes thus far, but in the next two games could absolutely be huge impacts and could go down in pretty legendary status at the end of this. Then we have some CFP questions. We have which coach needs the title the most. I think we know the answer to that one. And then which player has the most to gain from this, and that one was pretty easy to me as well, frankly. Then we have some CFP rankings. I'll give my semifinal rankings for the coaches and the quarterbacks. Was very, very hard to do, and have to imagine there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me, but more than fine, understand, would love to see y'all's rankings by the time this finishes. But let's, before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that and we can have a fun little back and forth. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, because we are very, very close to these things kicking off. About 2 days till that Penn State Notre Dame game. One day after that, you'll see Ohio State Texas. Some weather stuff that we'll talk about probably later in the week that could affect that game, but hopefully nothing too bad. But let's get into some keys for the national championship if these teams are going to win the next two games and they're going to lift the national trophy. Excuse me. If they're going to lift the CFP trophy, what do they need to do? What are the things that need to happen for them? And we'll start with Penn State. They feel like the one that might be the easiest of the bunch in a weird way. They do what they do so incredibly well, but I think one of the things that's going to have to get unlocked is the offensive creativity, and it's something that Andy Kotelnicki does incredibly well. When you look back to the SMU and the Boise State game, didn't really need to go off what they wanted to do, right? They were able to run the football, they were able to take care of the football, they were able to essentially get out of there with pretty comfortable wins in both of them. Obviously, Boise State pushed him a little bit, and frankly, that was probably because he was getting a little bit too creative when he probably didn't need to against Boise State. So I do think they were able to kind of keep the ball on the ground, ride their two running backs to victory in those first two games. I don't think you'll be able to do that in these next two. I think you're going to have to get a little bit more creative. Drew Allar's going to have to play a little bit better football, played great against Boise State, is going to have to kick it up even another notch in the next couple of games against Notre Dame and then possibly Ohio State or Texas in the championship. So he's going to have to get a little bit creative. You know, their top three defenses in the country, I would argue the next three guys you're going to have to play, you're going to have to be ready to roll, and you're going to have to make sure that you get those wide receivers open. You're going to have to make sure you get Tyler Warren the ball, do all of those different things that did incredibly well throughout the season. Didn't necessarily have to do it the last couple of games. Definitely will have to do it the next two if you want to lift that championship trophy. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it's very simple. That guy has to be on the field. Abdul Carter is probably the biggest difference maker on the defensive side of the ball left in the tournament, and there are a lot of difference makers on the defensive side of the ball. You know, there's Colin Simmons at Texas, Caleb Downs over at Ohio State. You do have Xavier Watts and all those guys over at Notre Dame. Abdul Carter is a difference maker in every sense of the word. He has 11 sacks on the year, fourth in the team in tackles. He is the outright leader of this team, not just the defense. He is the leader of this team, and he very badly needs to be on the field. Great communicator, absolutely is a guy that will make all the plays in the world, and especially when you're playing a quarterback like Riley Leonard that can make plays with his legs, having that athletic edge rusher is hugely important because he can keep his foot, keep level to the line of scrimmage, go make a play on the quarterback, go make a play on the running back. He can do everything you possibly want him to do. He's got to be on the field to do that. He's got to be near 100% to do that the way that you want him to. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Obviously, something we'll update you on tomorrow. I fully expect him to play in that game. How close to 100% he is could decide how far Penn State moves on going forward. But moving forward to Notre Dame, pass game consistency is just the reality of this team, and I think it has been really the entirety of the year. They've been really good rushing team. They had that three-headed monster between Riley Leonard, Jadarian Price, and Jeremiah Love that has created all types of problems for defenses. But the reality is, if you want to beat Penn State, if you want to beat Ohio State or Texas, you're going to have to put points on the board. You're not going to be able to beat them 23-10 the way you beat Georgia. You're not going to be able to beat them 27-17 the way you beat Indiana. You're probably going to have to beat them 34-30 or 34-27 because there's too much offensive firepower on the other side of the field to where you can't have a little bit yourself. So Jordan Faison needs to continue to step up. Mitchell Evans probably needs to be a little bit bigger part of this offense, and some different guys need to continue to step up into big spaces because the reality is this pass game is good, not quite to a national championship level, especially when you have run defenses like they're going to face in the next couple of games. So it's a huge piece. Riley Leonard's been throwing the ball very confidently. You might need to kick it up just another notch to go against these defenses and possibly win a national title for Notre Dame. This is probably the biggest one of the bunch, if I'm being totally honest. Controlling the pace of the game is what Notre Dame does. It's what they've been able to do really this entire year, and it's been a really special thing to watch. That three-headed monster at running back has kept them in front of the chains, given them 4 yards on a 3rd and 3 or 5 yards on a 3rd and 4, and put them in a great position to move forward and just continue these long, taxing drives on a defense. If they can't do that, if they get off the field in 3 plays, or even, as crazy as this sounds, if they do get a 3-play touchdown drive, but then you give the ball right back to Penn State leaning on your defense, it could go the other direction. So Notre Dame has done an incredible job throughout this year, getting early leads, being able to control the pace with their run game, and getting out with pretty comfortable wins. If they go down 14-0 in this game, that's not going to be the case. So you got to control the pace. You got to make sure these running backs and Riley Leonard mainly gets their feet under him, and you can kind of just get those 3 yards when you need them. You get those 4 yards when you need them, and just work your way down the field. It is not going to be an explosive offense. It shouldn't be an explosive offense. They should lean on people and just let the chips fall where they may. Then you do have Texas, and it's kind of the same thing. That run game has to show up. This is the reality of the situation for Texas, where Quinn Ewers, as far as I'm concerned, has played incredible football the last 2 games. He had tough moments against Arizona State, had the pick against Clemson on an outright drop by DeAndre Moore, but at the end of the day, they have looked out of sync at times, even in these 2 games where they scored 38 and 39 points. That run game is everything for this team. If you add that run game to what Quinn Ewers has been able to do throwing the football, especially with time to kind of dissect the field, this offense can put up 30 points on just about any defense in the country. They have all the talent in the world. The O-line has to play better. That's the reality. They haven't necessarily fared all that well with the big-time physical defensive linemen that have been great at stopping the run, like a Georgia. Even like in Arizona State last week, they did such a good job of those defensive linemen holding their own, and then the linebackers and the safeties coming down and really making plays in the run game. Same exact thing that Ohio State will do. So they're going to have to get a little creative. They're going to have to get different in this one, but if they don't have a run game in this, and you're just asking Quinn Ewers to go out there and win you a game against this Ohio State defense, that's just not going to happen. So that run game has to show up big. If they're going to win the next 2 games and win their first title since 2005, those 2 guys, Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner, are probably the most important players on the team. Then you do have this question, and I really don't know the solution to this one. They have not played a complete 4 quarters in quite some time, has Texas. They've been outscored 43-6 in the last 6 third quarters they've played. It's been really tough towards the backstretch of the season for them to just play 4 quarters of football, sit out there and play really clean football, really complimentary football for 4 quarters. If they can do that, they are as good of a team as just about anyone else in this bracket. Ohio State is a team that looks absolutely terrifying right now. Texas, at their very top level, can play with Ohio State, can play a game that looks like one of the best games in the entire year, looks like a national championship game. That being said, they've also put themselves in situations where, unless they're up 21-0 in the first half, which I do not expect to happen, they could come crumbling down in the third quarter and then everything falls away. So they're going to have to play more clean. There's no doubt about that. It can't just be about treading water in the third quarter. It's got to be about putting points on the board. It's got to be about continuing what you started in the first half. It's going to be a 4-quarter battle. If they don't play a complete 4 quarters against Ohio State's going to win by 14 points, plain and simple. And then you do have Ohio State. Play with that edge. It's going to become harder and harder to play with that edge that they've had the last couple of games. But against Tennessee, it was about shutting everyone up, telling everyone that we are still Ohio State, we still can play elite level football. Against Oregon, it was about getting revenge. The team that beat them early in the season in dramatic fashion, they wanted to get back at that team. Absolutely showed on the field. what's the motivation here? Where does the edge come from in this game? You're 6.5-point favorites going in. You have a Texas team that everyone in the world is telling you that you're going to beat and beat pretty comfortably. You are firmly the favorite to win the national title. Where does that come from? Where does the motivation come from? Obviously, there's still plenty to play for this team, but you're still going to have that little bit of edge. This team plays best when they play fast and they play angry, because the reality is the talent on the football field for Ohio State is astronomically good. If you let those guys loose, if you let them off the leash and let them fly, they're going to make a lot of different plays. You got to make sure you keep that edge. You got to make sure you keep that everyone's against us mentality. Going to be a little bit harder being that favorite that they're going to be in the next two games. If they win against Texas, they will be at least a touchdown favorite in the national title. So can they keep that edge? And if they can, everyone's just going to have to pray that they can beat this team. And then clean football from Will Howard. This is probably the most important thing. When you talk about what Will Howard has done over the last two games, it's been incredibly impressive. The throws he's been capable of making. The most impressive thing is he's been not giving the ball away. Has 0 turnovers over the last couple of games, has 5 passing touchdowns. This guy has been playing the best football that I've ever seen him play over the last two games. He's also been known to have those moments, right? Against Penn State, he had that pick, he had the fumble through the end zone. Against Oregon, had the slide down early, had a couple of different mistakes throughout that game. This is a moment where it could kind of all come tumbling down, and the question becomes, when he makes that first mistake, will he make a second? Will he make a third? Will it start to kind of snowball, and then the Texas defense really has life, the Texas team really has life with an INT or a fumble from Will Howard? So you're going to have to play clean football. There's no doubt about that. If he plays clean football and they play with the edge that we were just talking about, this is your national champion. I feel very, very confident in that. I don't think that's going to change in any respect going forward. So that's what you have. You have a ton of different keys for these teams, and I think they're a little bit different all across the place. You look at Notre Dame and Penn State, probably need a little bit more balance in their offensive attack. Now, Penn State's a little bit better about that than Notre Dame is, but at the end of the day, both of them are going to need a pass game to really complement that run game that's so talented. On the other side, you have Texas and Ohio State. Ohio State needs that energy. They need that edge. Texas got to find that run game one way or the other. If you don't find that run game, it's going to get really ugly. If you don't play 4 quarters, then it's going to get ugly the same way the Ohio State-Oregon game did. So it's going to be a battle. It's going to be really fun to watch these 4 teams go at it. All 4 of these teams are capable of winning a national title. If these couple of things get tweaked, they could be really special teams, and we could be watching them lift that trophy in a couple of weeks. But we'll break it all down in time, obviously. My picks are coming tomorrow, just fair warning. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we had a championship last night. The FCS went at it, and it was an incredible game between NDSU as well as Montana State, and I wanted to break it down right after this, so stick with us.